Hey everyone, I'm Kate Kennedy and I'm here with day 15 of 100 Days of Kane, PA. And today you guys are in for a treat. We're going to talk to Dee Graville, who has been just made a mark in Kane from the very beginning. And she has some stories to tell about how the legendary Birdcage got started, her time there, and her time in Rotary. And one of the things I love about Dee, something that I learned about her when I was younger and just stuck with me, is that before she goes to bed every night, she puts on lipstick in case something happens in the middle of the night that she'll look good. So I just think she's such a fun person to hear from, and I know you guys requested stories from her. So we're gonna go on in today and talk to Dee about the birdcage. So go ahead and flip you around. And here we go inside. And before I introduce you to Dee, hello Dee.
Hi.
I wanna show you Happy, because you're gonna hear Happy in the background. Hey Happy. So even though we have stories about the birdcage, we have an actual bird in an actual birdcage here today too. All right, hey Dee, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Oh, I'm so happy you're back in Kane.
Oh,
I missed you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back. And so one of the things that has been requested is stories about the birdcage. That was a great time in Kane history, and you were right at the center of it. And so could you tell us how it even began, the very, very beginning of the birdcage?
In the beginning, when the first Gravilles came to Kane,
Yeah,
or just
yeah.
the birdcage?
Well, how about when the first Gravilles came to Kane? Where did they come
Okay.
from? How did they get to Kane? And how did the
Yes.
birdcage start?
Yeah, Mr. Graville was from Ireland. Mrs. Graville was from England. They lived in Pittsburgh, and he worked on the railroad. So when they'd come through Kane, the trains would stop, and he really loved this little town, so he decided he wanted to open his own business, and especially if he could have a hotel. He knew the hotel was for sale, the Windsor Hotel. So that's why they bought it in 1914. They had one child, Dick, that was almost a year old, and the other three weren't born yet. So that was when they first bought it.
Yeah, so they were from Ireland and England, moved to
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, then fell in love with Kane.
Yes.
So they moved to Kane and bought the Windsor Hotel
Right.
and worked there. And then how did it go from the Windsor Hotel to what it became?
Oh, it was the one part of it was a great big restaurant, and besides, when the trains went through, their restaurant and the one across the street, the Penn Kane, then had both nice sized restaurants. So the trains would stop and let people have lunch before they'd go on again. So those two restaurants were really busy. But then years later, when Mr. Graville died, when she had raised the four kids by herself, and that's when she closed the restaurant because she couldn't run it and take care of her kids and the rest of the hotel and everything. So she rented it out to the first AMP that came to Kane.
Oh, wow.
So that's how it started.
Yeah. And then how did your husband get involved in the business?
When Dick was 15 years old, Jim was 14. Mr. Graville, that's when he had died. I told you that. When Jim was 20 years old, he decided they opened a bar downstairs. The other side of the restaurant, they opened into a bar, and Dick ran the bar. So Jim opened the second floor and made it the Birdcage, and it used to be their apartment. They took down all the partitions, made one great big room out of it, and he opened it up when he was 20 years old. He wasn't even allowed behind the bar in those days when you were 20. You had to be 21. So he had to stay in the kitchen and wash glasses, even though he owned the place.
Oh, jeez.
So that's how the Birdcage got started.
And what was the original name of it?
Oh, the downstairs was the Windsor Bar, and the upstairs was the Windsor Grill. And so that's when the Bell telephone men were putting in all the phones and all the wires and everything in Kane. So they stayed here. The first summer they were here all the time. They had nothing to do nights, so they started coming up to the Birdcage, which was the Windsor Grill. And they said, we don't like the name of the Windsor Grill. We want to name it something else. Since it's upstairs, let's call it a Birdcage. So the Bell telephone men named it the Birdcage.
And the name
it
stuck. Yep. And you, when it first opened, you weren't involved.
I wasn't born. Yes, I was actually born. I was born in 1927.
Well, when your husband took it over, though, you weren't involved with it. yet, right?
No,
How did you get involved?
not till we got married. I was 20 and Jim was 32 when we got married.
How did you meet?
During the war, I had a job at the. I went to. I was a freshman in school. So all those 4 years, I left school at 3:00, went to the Temple Pharmacy, worked at the Temple Pharmacy till 10:30 at night. So I did that for 4 years, and when the war was over, then after I graduated, the war was over 2 months later, and all the boys that came home had to sign up to get new jobs and everything across the street. So that's how we met. All the boys got through signing up, and they all came to the Temple Pharmacy. And of course, all of us young girls were there, so we were thrilled to death.
So you had lots of dates in those days.
Oh, yes, everyone did. We were so thrilled because all these guys were away during the war.
Yeah, what was it like in Kane during the war? What was...
Oh, nothing. Of course, you either walked or rode a bicycle. And the best thing about it is we had 2 theaters.
Mm.
But other than that, there was no nightlife unless if you were an adult and went to the Birdcage.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it was really like all the small towns. There wasn't too much to do.
Mm-hmm. And so when everyone came home, it was an exciting time.
It was wonderful. Oh, yes, yes, it was just great.
And how old were you when you got married?
20. I was 20 and Jim was 32 in 1947.
And he was working at the Birdcage.
Yes.
And then because at one point in time your name was on the lease, right?
Oh,
How did that happen?
When Jim got many years later, Jim got crippled and couldn't work anymore. I was about 44 then, I think, at the time when the doctor said he was having a hard time talking. He could hardly walk. He could walk with a walker and just a little bit around the house. So Jim said, I'll have to sell the place. And I said, well, I can go to work and tend bar. And he said, you don't even know how much a bottle of beer is. What could you do? And I said, I can try. I can learn. So he had a waitress that helped, that lived with her 3 kids in one of the apartments in the building. So he said, she'll help you learn. So she did. And I loved it. I was out with people. My kids were already, teenage. Debbie was already married. And I'd been home quietly with kids all those years. And all of a sudden, there was a nightlife.
It was your time to shine. So you did everything, though. You tended bar, you managed the staff.
Well, I was only there for a while till it was our 25th wedding anniversary when his brother was hit by a car and killed. So from then on, Jim couldn't work. His brother was dead. So for me to keep the hotel with the license and everything, the liquor control board said it had to be in my name. So everything was in my name then. Because the brothers had a deal that when one died, the other one got everything and paid off the widow of the one that was killed. So I had to pay off Miss Helen Graville.
Yeah, so you went from being a mom who was raising kids and not really doing a lot socially to now owning a business.
Yes, and I never went out at night, never went with friends. The only time I was out at night is with my husband, because Sundays the bar was closed. Pennsylvania, everything was closed. So Sunday was our big day to date.
Yeah, to be social.
Yes. Other than that, I never went anyplace.
And I know you got to meet a lot of people and have a lot of friends during your time. When did the Birdcage close?
I was 60. And 32 years ago. I'm 92, so 32 years ago, I closed the Birdcage. Right after the St. Patrick's Day party.
Oh, you went out with a bang.
Yes.
And you got to know a lot of the Rotary people. You were saying you had it open for Rotary and Chamber people after their meetings. And then you continued to work and be involved with Rotary for years afterward. What did you do there? And can you share a story about a time that you were helping out with Rotary?
One year, the girl that does their lunch, we got the lunch from a different restaurant every Monday. And Steve Short had been running that. That was his job for years. And then they talked my son into doing it. And Jimmy said, "Mom, the girl that's helping next Monday is going to be out of town for an interview, and she can't do it. Could you help us by doing it that day?" And I said, "Yes, sure. If you tell me what I have to do." Well, she got the job. Next Monday they find out, and he said, "Will you stay and do it until we get someone?" Well, 20 years later, they let me go. So every once in a while I'd say, "Have you guys gotten anyone yet?" And they'd say, "Good luck, Dee." But I loved it. I loved it. And working for the Rotarians was wonderful. They were a great group.
Right. So even after the Birdcage closed, you found a way to stay connected in a social setting.
Yes.
Serving people, making people happy.
Oh, I did love it. Yes.
Will you tell the story about the time that you fainted?
Well, when they bring their plates and everything out afterwards, and that was my job, washing the plates and everything. And Joe Feichels was the first one that came out. And before the meeting was over, I kept thinking, I feel really weird. I hope the meeting is short, and so I can go in. And there was a step right in front of the stage that was carpeted. And so I thought, I can lay down for a minute after everyone leaves. Well, Joe Feichels was the first one that came out the kitchen. He said, "How you doing, Dee?" And I said, "Fine." I didn't even say the whole word fine. I said, "Fine." And then I went backwards, and he caught me by the shoulders. And I fainted, and he pulled me by my shoulders, and I was dragging my heels, I guess, and he laid me down on the step that was carpeted. So I said, "How would you like to wake up after being out and not knowing where you are or anything? You wake up and you look, and there's two undertakers looking down at you." It was Ron McDonald and Sam Cummings both looking down at me. And I look up and I think, am I dead? Are they saying, who's going to get me? And then Ron said to hold my arms up in the air and smile. And so I did, and he looked at Sam and said, "It's not a stroke."
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you were okay, but that's really funny that they were the two that you
Yes.
opened your eyes to. And you have lived in the Kane area your whole life, right? You graduated
Yes.
from Kane High School?
Yes.
What year did you graduate?
1945.
1940.
Just as the war started. I started as a freshman, and the war had just been declared.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like for you growing up? Where did you grow up, and what was that life like?
I grew up in a little town, Nansen, 7 miles out the road, and I wasn't born. That's when babies were born at home, and it wasn't along the highway. It was actually in the woods. We had a house in the woods, and it was 1927. I'm really old. And
you look amazing, by the way.
And you didn't have anything. You didn't have electricity. You didn't have water. You didn't have gas. You had nothing. And you lived off the land. You had a garden, and you didn't have a car, so you didn't have insurances. And my dad worked on a lease, and he fell one day when the men would stop. And when it was hot in the summertime, there was a spring, and they'd stop and get a drink from the spring. And when he went to get a drink of water, he fell and he threw his knee out, and he was on crutches for a whole year. And he couldn't get compensation because he was 3 feet off the lane where he was supposed to be. Mm. And so he didn't have a job for a long time. And so we really had nothing. You lived off the land, and we had chicken on Sundays because Dad raised chickens. And other than that, we lived off our garden. And then we had a lot of apple trees around. And of course, in the summertime, raspberries, strawberries, and things. So you learn to live off of what you had.
Yeah.
So in your school lunch, when I was old enough to go to school, you had a jelly sandwich and an apple. And that was it. And so anyway, until I was a freshman, we lived there.
And then you moved to Kane when you were a freshman.
Yes.
Where in Kane did you move to?
On the west side, Tynest Avenue. And oh, I loved it. To me, it was a city after living with your grandmother and grandfather lived. My grandfather had a service station right along the highway part. And by the time I was like 8 or 9 years old, every once in a while he'd go out and work in the garden and tell me to watch. So if a car came and you pumped gas, they had one gas tank or pump. And when I did that, I found out gasoline was only 7 cents a gallon.
Oh my goodness.
so so anyway, we went to school in Russell City. We walked to the up to the highway and got the bus and went to Russell City to school. And I loved it because since we never had a car, I got a chance to ride on a big school bus. And of course, when you don't have water in your house, you have an outhouse. And everyone hates to have an outhouse. So when I went to school, there was a bathroom inside the building. And I thought that was great.
Yeah. So that's where you started. Then you moved to Kane when you were in ninth grade, and then once you got married, you guys moved out here to the
Yes.
Highland area.
Yes.
Yeah.
This was called Carlson Heights.
And you've been here for years.
It's 60, let's see. Debbie was 2 and she's 69 now, so 67 years.
Yeah. So why do you love Kane?
Oh, I love everything about Kane. I just did. Kane was a nice place to grow up in. And all during the war, it was lonesome, but still I had a job and I had school, so it wasn't quiet or anything. But it was no fun to not have a date for years. So, but no, I've always liked Kane a lot.
Well, you've added a lot of fun to Kane. You and your family.
Oh,
You're a great addition
you.
to this town. And is there anything else that you'd like to share before we finish up today?
Well, I'm awfully glad you're back. And I remember my daughter was a teacher. Debbie was a teacher in school. And when you went for your first day, she said you were the cutest little thing. And she said your dad brought you. And he was more scared to leave his daughter there. He was more scared than you were the first day of school.
Yeah, she was my first teacher in Kane.
Yeah, and new town and everything. He's leaving his only little child with strangers.
Well, of all strangers, Debbie was a great one.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I'm sure there's many more stories to be shared. So if you guys have questions about the Birdcage and want to hear specific stories, I'm sure Dee would love to tell you. So thank you, Dee. And
You're welcome.
I'm going to flip you around. All right, you guys, thanks so much for tuning in today for day 15. Hey, it's Friday, and so I propose that every Friday we all wear our Kane t-shirts. I know that we all have them from growing up, tucked away in our closets. If you don't have one, there's some at the chamber office that Kara is selling, like this one. Fight Kane Fight. But Cammie's Corner also sells a lot of Kane t-shirts. I think it would just be like Spirit Week every week if we all wore our Kane t-shirts on Friday. So that's my challenge to you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow for day 16.